stand.
Numéro 130.
Number 139, Senator Omidvar.
Thank you, Speaker. Colleagues, as I stand today to address you on this motion, it occurs to me how incredibly fortunate we are in this chamber. In this one session, we have addressed issues ranging from environmental racism to the complexity of being a juror to regulating casinos. And I will add to that richness, I hope, by transporting you to a different place, a different reality, namely to Afghanistan, as I rise to speak on Motion 139 that the Senate call on the Government of Canada to recognize the erasure of Afghan women and girls from public life as gender apartheid. I want to thank Senator Ataullah Jan for bringing this urgent motion forward. It is hard to imagine how a woman or a young girl lives her daily life in Afghanistan. So let me try and paint you a picture. She is not allowed to go outside her home without a male member of her family. She is not allowed to go to the park or to a gym. She is not allowed to go to school beyond grade 6, giving Afghanistan the dubious distinction of being the only country in the world to deny education to women and girls. Education, the door to empowerment, to self-reliance, to agency, to economic independence, has been slammed shut for her. She's not allowed to go to a beauty salon because these have been banned. She's not allowed to work, not as a judge, not as a parliamentarian, not as a researcher, not as a teacher, not even in community service. She's not allowed to listen to music. And of course, dancing is prohibited. There is no recourse to her if she is threatened by violence. But nothing gets the Taliban more riled up than what a woman wears. So now she must wear a head-to-toe burqa, which has small slits that you can barely see through. I have tried one on. And I understand that even the colors of these burqas are determined by the Taliban. And if these decrees are flouted, punishment is meted out to the male member of the family, thus creating a toxic environment in the home. To add to all this misery, famine is raging in Afghanistan, and it is the women and girls who are left vulnerable as impoverished Afghans resort to drastic measures for survival. A UNDP report highlights instances where individuals are forced to sell their homes, to sell their assets, to turn their children into laborers, and sell their daughters for survival. What future is there for this country when half its population is put in a metaphorical and literal prison? And why, you have to ask yourself, why? And the answer is actually quite simple. Because she is a woman. And therefore, Senator Ataullah Jan is right in calling it what it is, gender apartheid, and asks Canada to recognize it as such. I like the choice of words that the motion uses, erasure. And I hope the picture I have painted for you today in words results, that you understand that it results in the erasure of women from public life and public space. Apartheid is a loaded word. It takes us back to a dark and distressing area where fundamental human rights and segregation were based on race, where there were different laws for different people based on race. Sadly, it has been revived in Afghanistan in a vicious manner, and it puts gender in its crosshairs. Race also plays a role because there is a significant Hazara minority that lives in Afghanistan. So Hazara women are in double jeopardy, first as Hazaras and then as women. Colleagues, this is not mere discrimination. It is active persecution when laws, decrees, and policies exclude girls and women from public spaces. It is institutionalized, systemic oppression and domination of one gender against another. And there are only two words for it: gender apartheid. Many female leaders in Afghanistan, judges, parliamentarians, lawyers, journalists, women in hockey and sports, orchestra players, have left. Leaders like Nargis Nehan, Humaira Ayubi, Niloufar Moradi, Zefnoon Zafi, who were parliamentarians, lawyers, judges, journalists, are now living in Canada. Listening to them is actually far more interesting than listening to me. An excellent documentary titled An Unfinished Journey captures their voice, even as they struggle in a strange society and face the challenges of integration, loss of face, because it's hopeless for them to try and find work commensurate with their experience. Even as they struggle to learn English, they are united in giving voice to the persecuted sisters they left back in Afghanistan. And I want to give enormous credit to our colleague, Senator Mary Lou McPherson, for her tireless efforts in supporting the creation of the Canadian Feminist Forum for Afghanistan, where Canadian and Afghan women are coalescing to fight against these monsters in Afghanistan. Canada cannot and must not engage with the Taliban, but at the same time, we cannot abandon the women of Afghanistan, and there are actions we can take. For one, we can provide support to Canada's Feminist Forum for Afghanistan, which is hosting an event here on the Hill on May 21st. And I encourage you all to attend, because I said listening to them is far more interesting than listening to me. We can support them as they build their capacity, as they reach out to their sisters in Afghanistan, as they become their voice, not just in Canada, but across the world. But as a second, Canada can take a leading role on the global stage with these women at its side in amending, inserting, and so codifying the terminology of gender apartheid into the UN Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. In March, many of us in this chamber attended the UN Status of Women Conference, where multiple sessions focusing on the situation of Afghani women were held. There was standing room crowd only. Senator Pitton and I had to use our elbows to try and find a spot to listen to Afghani journalists and lawyers. And it was clear to me that this global campaign to insert gender apartheid into the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty has legs, and it is picking up speed. It is not an abstract idea, What difference does it make if there is a multilateral treaty saying this or that? But this has teeth. According to the Atlantic Council, the codification of gender apartheid offers new avenues to bring both state and individual perpetrators to justice. Countries that are signatories of the treaty would be obliged to criminalize gender apartheid and implement measures to prevent and punish crimes against humanity within their domestic legal frameworks. This could potentially pave the way for prosecution based on the principle of universal jurisdiction, which asserts that certain egregious crimes can be tried in any court, regardless of the nationality of the perpetrator, victims, or the location of the acts. The inclusion of the gender apartheid, of the crime of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity would additionally reinforce the obligations of states and international organizations to prevent and punish gender apartheid, even if they are not direct parties to the treaty. Thus, it is hoped, will galvanize diplomatic, legal, and social movements of resistance in Afghanistan, as well as in other crisis situations, both presently and in the future. This motion, when approved, will be the beginning of a concerted multilateral action. International pressure and diplomatic efforts are crucial to influence policy change in Afghanistan. At some point, colleagues, even the Taliban will need to engage. Any economic support or aid must be contingent upon tangible improvements in gender equality, ensuring that progress is not just rhetoric, but a reality experienced by every Afghan woman. So where does this start? I submit to you, colleagues, that it starts here. Each one of us here has a mother. Many of us have sisters and daughters, and each one of us should therefore be appalled, outraged by the behavior of this rogue government. Each one of us should therefore support Senator Ataullah Jan's before us, and each one of us should want to do this very quickly, because each and every day is a dark day for women and girls in Afghanistan. Thank you.
I believe there are two people that will ask questions. Senator Lankin, do you accept a question? Senator Lankin.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Senator Omidvar, I appreciate your speech so much, and I appreciate the work that Senator Tulajan has done in bringing this forward. I appreciate that you mentioned Senator McPhedran, not just about the establishment of the forum, but I want to add our thanks to her for the brave action she took with the network of women in the dying hours of the Kabul airport before it closed to get women out. I want to ask you about the steps that will be taken, hopefully once this is approved and accepted here in Canada, the steps that would be taken with respect to the international lobby to insert this in UN documents and in the definitions with real teeth, as you said. What will the next steps be, and what is the timeline to let people have in mind that they're working towards? Is there a decision point at the UN that is coming up? And if you don't have that information now, is that something that you could circulate to us, and what efforts that we can make as individual senators and through our own networks to support bringing this about? And thank you again, Senator Tulajan. It's very important work that you're leading here, and with strong voices like Senator Omidvar supporting you.
Senator Omidvar.
Thank you very much, Senator Lankin, for your question, and I too wish to underline the contributions of Senator McPhedran, which she has made, as we know, at some significant cost to herself. Your question about the timeline of the campaign is moving towards the next summit in March in 2025. But I do want to say that all member states have to sign on to this crimes against humanity. And we all know that there are some states who are members of the UN who will provide a great deal of resistance. And I understand that there is a pathway to circumvent that. I don't have the details, but an important benchmark is always going to be the March summit at the UN.
Cardozo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Omidvar, will you take a question? Thank you. As perhaps one of the few senators who's been to Afghanistan as a child on a summer holiday, if you can imagine that, but it was back in 1969, and I have only the most wonderful memories of a very beautiful, peaceful country at that time. So I want to congratulate you on the speech, and special compliments to Senator Ataullah Jan for leading this motion. Do you have hope that in the interim, before the United Nations could make this happen, that our speaking out might have any kind of effect on the government of Afghanistan? Does it help if we take whatever efforts we can to send these messages?
Senator Omidvar.
I actually don't have an answer to that question. I don't know how the Taliban hears things or doesn't hear things. I don't know if they have a foreign minister. I do know they have a minister for vice, which you can understand given their context. So I don't really know. They have isolated themselves to an extent, but on the other hand, they are in contact with regional governments I understand Qatar has a role to play. I understand other countries in the Middle East have a role to play. So perhaps if we speak out and speak to these other jurisdictions, the message may be received.